presented live from Baltimore by the Johns Hopkins University and the ABC Television Network. Tomorrow is dedicated to you, the youth of America, and to the parents and teachers anxious to help you select a career full of worthwhile contributions and personal satisfactions. You who'll be the leaders of tomorrow are now studying on the campuses of schools and universities like this one at Johns Hopkins. Your actions will shape our world, will set the stage for things to come. Your future is our security. At this moment, you may be wondering what tomorrow has in store for you. You may be trying to decide what career you should select. As you study and work, we hope to show you the highlights of many interesting careers. We hope this parade of career possibilities will help you select your future work.
This week, we demonstrate the career of the teacher with Lynn Poole and his guest, Mr. George Schwartz. These children are the workers of tomorrow, the doctors, lawyers, teachers, carpenters, scientists, electricians. They will be the leaders and the followers. The future of our world depends on them. Next to their parents, the greatest influence in their lives will be their teachers. Today, there is a desperate need for teachers. This week, we will demonstrate the requirements of a good teacher and the satisfactions that result from the career of teaching.
That's why I have that lunch with you. You might be late. You have late. You got up early.
I think he was at the track practice just before he came in here, but this is a scene that you've seen over and over again. Those of you who are adults have been in the halls of schools. Those of you in school at the present time have seen how they run for classes just like that, and they talk about a lot of things as they go down the hall. Well, you know, during the past few weeks, we have been talking about the various careers that are available to you. We've talked about the metallurgists, the chemists, the engineers, doctors, all sorts of careers, such as merchandising and retailing. These are all wonderful careers. They're open to all of you. Wonderful things happen in these careers. Things are developed, things are discovered, things are brought to me and to you in order that our lives are happier. It's a fabulous country, they're fabulous careers. But there's one thing that we've forgotten. We have forgotten one person who, as much as anyone, is responsible for all of these things. That's the teacher. The man who makes discoveries, the woman who makes developments, has to be taught the basic knowledge in high school and in college and in graduate study has to be given from the mind of one person to another. And the person that gives that is the teacher. Who influences people? The teacher. In a recent study where 50,000 people, very successful people, were asked one question, and that question was this: who influenced your choice of careers? 89% of those 50,000 people said, a teacher or my teachers. This is a pretty powerful thing. Teaching is a great career, one that's very important for the future of this country, for all of us. So this week, we'd like to talk about the teacher. We'd like to see a teacher at work and find out how a teacher conveys ideas, how he teaches and brings young people along. So to do that, come into the classroom with me, a classroom of Mr. George Schwartz, and let's see what's going on. At this moment, Mr. Schwartz has been teaching a class, and I think we could interrupt him at this point and ask him if he will tell us what are some of the problems of the teacher, how a teacher plans his work, how he leads young people along, and what are the values of teaching.
Good evening. Certainly no one who reads the papers these days or listens to radio news broadcasts or watches a newscast in television can be at all in doubt about the fact that there is a serious teacher shortage. So serious a teacher shortage that every year it gets worse and worse and worse. One statistic occurs to me right now. this coming year, we will need, in the high schools of this country, about 1,400 new physics teachers. There are less than 100 graduating. That's just one subject. And when we think of all the levels of education and the fact that this problem will become more acute in the high schools beginning this coming year and then creep on up into the colleges, the need for teachers on every level of education is appalling. But the need is not just for teachers, just for bodies to occupy a place in front of the classroom. The need is for people who are qualified, well-trained, equipped in every way to deal with a very, very complex kind of profession. And a profession it is, and a complex relationship it is, because teaching is an art, not a science. It can't be routinized. You can't put down the steps one by one and assume that anyone who follows those steps is going to do a particularly good job in the classroom. It's an art because it involves personal relationships, relationships between a teacher and his pupils, and it involves setting up some kind of rapport between the teacher and his pupils so that they respect him, they trust him, and they have a high regard for him in every way, or for her. I shouldn't assume that teachers are only males. In fact, the trouble is I suspect that too many of them are women, and that can be misinterpreted too, but certainly there is a need for more men in the classroom on every level. Well, now, recognizing that there is a need for teachers, what should you do if you feel that perhaps you want to become a teacher? What do you need to know? What do you need to be? There are a lot of questions you'll need to ask yourself. But I thought that perhaps tonight it would be better to start with some kind of demonstration of what I have just called the art of teaching. This art of establishing some relationship, a very complex one, between pupils and teachers, which leads to learning, which leads to this development of a bridge between youth and maturity, because that's what teaching is. Now, we don't mean by teaching accumulation of facts, because certainly no one is more boring than someone who is well-informed and only well-informed. A teacher must be more, and the persons he turns out must be more than well-informed. They must get away from this dry rot of academic biology or academic history. Now, in my own teaching, and I wanted to illustrate with this, my first 2 weeks are critical ones, because it is at that time that I try to establish some kind of relationship with my pupils. Now, I hope you'll recognize that the things I'm going to do and show you are not stunts. They may appear to be stunts if they're taken in isolation, but perhaps I can relate to you the way in which I use them. For example, I think a teacher has to be something of a showman, someone who produces the unexpected, does things that the pupils don't expect. For example, you may not have noticed I had my hand in my pocket because in my hand I had this very wonderful little tree frog, and on occasion I would use an animal of this sort to demonstrate something, and notice I had it in my pocket. Oh, he's going up the sleeve. You see how well equipped he is to climb. Well, we'll put him away where he's out of harm's way and where he gets an appropriate amount of moisture. Now, the object was not just to show a frog, of course, but you'll notice that I had it in my pocket. Now, the reason is simple. If everything I'm going to use, and I'm violating it here by having everything right out on the table before me, is in front of my students, they've seen textbooks, they've seen diagrams, and often they will try to anticipate what we're going to do. I try to hide things and produce them only when there's a need for them. But suppose we look at a few of the things that I try to do at the beginning to interest students in science. I ask my group what they think science means. And after getting a lot of rather forbidding dictionary definitions, I tell them I don't agree with those definitions at all. I think science means two simple things, possibly three, but we'll just illustrate two tonight. The first one is that all things obey rules. And so suppose I show one rule. I have a very heavy container of water, and you're not worried, are you, Debbie? And, well, we have paper under it, and Suppose you watch. You didn't think it was going to work, did you? Well, there's a rule involved in this little demonstration, and it's an important one. It's the rule of inertia. And a body at rest tends to stay at rest. A body in motion tends to stay in motion unless you act on it. Now, I pulled this paper out so fast that you didn't have a chance, I didn't have a chance to move this. But let me show you that this paper is strong enough to hold it, because if I want to move it, I can move it. And then I get it over to the edge, and then, again, almost. Well, now, suppose we look at another one. There are so many rules, and actually, you people know lots of them. Suppose I take this card. I have a milk bottle full of water. And really, there's nothing on the top, because you'll see it's wet. And I'm going to hold this card over it, and then I'm going to invert it. Now, I haven't been wet in many years of teaching. This may be the first one. Yeah. Well, it doesn't fall out, does it? There's a rule involved here. And the rule is a very simple one. Air is exerting pressure, an enormous amount of pressure on the water in this container. And I can show you another one that involves this very same thing. And suppose we look at it. It'll take me a moment to set it up, but I have a ruler here. You see, it's firm, and I'm going to put this out of the way if I may. And just put the ruler down, and I'm going to cover the ruler with this newspaper. Now, there's air pressing down on this, and you might not imagine that I can do what I'm going to do, but I'm going to break the end of this stick. I hope I keep all the air out. Well, here goes. Well, let me get it, and there it is. Tremendous amount of air pressing down. Well, now, here is a simple approach. From this, we go into many rules, and students begin to realize that things do obey rules. Then the next point of view that I try to get across is that things are not always what they seem. And optical illusions work wonderfully here. For example, this is a solid glass tube, but if I just shake it in this way, looks rubbery, doesn't it? Your eyes are not very dependable instruments of observation. Well, we could go on and do many of these stunts, but by the time I'm finished with this introduction, and it takes 2 or 3 days, my relationship with my students has been established. I think this perhaps suggests to you something of the art of teaching. Every teacher would do it in a different way. That's why teaching is an art, because everyone's experience is so crucial in this whole teaching situation. Well, I can sum it up and then perhaps later give you some inkling of this by saying that the importance of this whole job is that the teacher affects eternity. He just has no idea of where his influence will stop.
That's a very true statement. And I'm sure that there are a lot of you people who are my age that wish you could have studied general science with a man like Mr. Swartz. Matter of fact, George Swartz has been teaching for almost 25 years. At the moment, he's teaching in the Forest Hills High School in Long Island in New York, and came down to Baltimore to give us this demonstration today. If you ask Mr. Swartz, or a teacher like Mr. Swartz, what are the values in teaching? If you would say to him, what do you get out of teaching? You work hard. What are the results? One thing he would tell you, following the quote that he used a moment ago, is the rewards of teaching are found in the lives of successful pupils. So we thought we'd like to introduce you to some of Mr. Swartz's pupils, let you see what they're doing, let you hear from them what a real teacher means to them. Now, our first guest studied with Mr. Swartz quite some time ago. At the moment, he is an assistant professor of genetics at North Carolina State College, Dr. Richard Lewontin. And Dr. Lewontin, you were a student not so very long ago yourself, and I think you're an ideal person to answer the question, why did you go into teaching? so soon after being a student?
Well, I should think that two things that George Schwartz said probably give a hint to this. One is, of course, teaching is a personal matter, and each person has his own reason. But he said it was an art, and I think the word art gives the key away for me, at least. As any art, it requires some self-expression and some creative effort. And just as a man may be an author or a sculptor or a writer of some sort, so teaching is a way of self-expression, and it's creative. There's a second reason, too, I think. It's often said that a good teacher is a research person because he's constantly keeping new developments in front of him. But I should say that a good research person probably ought to teach, too, and I'm interested in research, and I think teaching helps with research. Because in a classroom, especially true when you're teaching perhaps at a higher level, you've got to constantly resynthesize your ideas, constantly give your students what you feel is the proper interpretation of new results.
Well, I'd like to say, and I can say to our viewers here, that Dr. Lewinton is fast becoming one of the best-known young geneticists in this country, and was an ideal person for us to choose to tell us why a young person goes into teaching. Dr. Lewinton, I would like to introduce to our viewers at this time a young man who was, as you were once, just graduating from high school, from Forest Hills High School in New York, who has a long way to go to catch up with you, but in his field, I suspect he's going to do it. And I'm referring to William Gurman, who 2 weeks from today graduates from high school. And Bill, you are going to be, as a matter of fact, you are now a herpetologist. And as we can see right here, a herpetologist is someone who works with snakes. And this playful fellow that you brought along here, what kind of snake is he?
This is a 4-foot bull snake from the Midwestern United States. They grow to about 7 feet, and so you can see this one is still fairly small. They're rated as being very beneficial to the farmer in that they consume large numbers of rats, mice, and other harmful rodents. And that's precisely what I feed him at home, about 1 rat or several mice every week.
How do you get these mice and rats?
Oh, a friend of mine supplies me with them.
How long have you been interested in snakes?
Oh, evidently I've been always interested in them, but I actually began collecting and keeping them several years ago. At first my parents were a bit apprehensive about keeping them down the cellar, but they got used to it. In fact, last summer when I took all my reptiles with me down to Ohio, my mother complained that the cellar was kind of dark and dull now that they weren't down there.
She got so used to them, she missed them after they were gone.
Yes.
Well, tell me this, did Mr. Schwartz, when you started studying with him in high school, did he start your interest in snakes?
No, he didn't actually start it, but he very definitely influenced me and intensified my interest. But more than just intensifying my interest in herpetology, he made me see that the field itself was very confining and narrow, and that it was necessary for me to take biology in as a whole. And in his classes, when I had him for a teacher, he pointed out the relationship between many of the facets of biology and how they interlock with each other.
Bill, you've pointed out something that's very important here, and that is that every good teacher has a job of interesting students far and above beyond one single subject to show how various subjects link and dovetail. Now, we've had the chance to meet a young professor and a student who just is about to graduate from high school, and now we have the chance to meet Mrs. von Hippel, who was also a student of Mr. Schwartz and is now a third-year student at the Harvard Medical College. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Hippel, do you mind if I tell them that just before you flew down here today, you finished your examinations for your third year in medical school? And I know they're going to come out all right. She was a little bit worried when she arrived here this afternoon that maybe she hadn't done so well, but I'm sure she did. Speaking of being a medical student, do you think that women have a tougher time getting into the medical profession than men?
I think whether you're a man or a woman, the two essential ingredients
to be a good doctor are, one, ability, and the second, confidence in that ability. There are very few people who would call a doctor into their house whom they didn't feel, at least, believed in what he was doing.
And had confidence in his own knowledge. Well, I'm sure that confidence is a thing you've always had.
No, there are many times in my life, both before I graduated from high school and since, that I have felt I did not know what I was doing. But when I was in high school particularly, Mr. Schwartz helped me very much in that regard. There was a contest when I was a senior called the Westinghouse Science Talent Search, and for this each contestant had to do a project. Well, I was sure that I didn't have a chance in this contest, and I went to Mr. Schwartz and I asked him about it. And I'll never forget what he said to me that day. I've thought of the words many times myself since. They were, "You can't lose anything by trying. The only thing you have is everything to gain and nothing to lose."
And he gave you confidence to go on with that, and I'm sure confidence with your future career in medicine. I know it's going to be a great success for you, and again, another example of how a teacher can influence a student, give them confidence, facts, knowledge, and help them towards success. But now let's meet another student of Mr. Schwartz, one who studied with him a few years ago and is now a freshman at Queens College in New York City, Miss Eva Bushke. As a matter of fact, we're awfully glad to have Eva here because it's sort of a return home, as her father and mother were members of the staff of the Johns Hopkins Hospital, so it's sort of coming home, isn't it, Eva?
Right.
I'd like to ask you one question, and that is this. What values beyond the very facts and knowledge, much of which you learned from Mr. Schwartz and teachers like him, what did you get beyond facts and knowledge?
Well, Mr. Schwartz greatly influenced my decision to major in biology in college and go into cancer research. But beyond interesting me in science, he taught me that human qualities in people were just as important, if not more so. Whenever he told us about any scientists who contributed to the knowledge of science, he told us about their other interests, and he told us what kind of people they were. And from this, I realized that people have to have human qualities, and actually, this goes hand in hand with science. You have to work together, and people have to possess this in order to be a success in science.
And as you told me earlier today, what you add to that is that science is only for human beings.
It is, and
It's only-
therefore we have to work together.
Work together so that the values of science can be used. Well, before I leave you, one more question, Eva. How can a young lady such as you, only a freshman in college, say, this is what I'm going to be in the future?
Well, it's very difficult, but actually, Mr. Schwartz taught so that he interested me in almost every field in biology. And yet, when we studied the diseases, I realized there were so many opportunities in research, such as cancer research, and that's why I decided to go into that at this particular time.
Well, and lots of luck to you. You've got a long way to go, but take confidence from Mrs. Von Hippel, and you're going to make it, Eva.
Thank you.
You see, there's so many things that go to make up a good teacher. And we picked these students of Mr. Schwartz to come down here, students of all ages, one who is with him now and others who have been with him before, to show them many qualities that go to make up a good teacher. Well, now, perhaps some of you would like to be teachers. Perhaps you'd like to take up the career of teaching in high school or college or university. Well, how do you start? Where do you begin? What do you do? These are questions that I think we should turn over to Mr. Schwartz and ask him for some of the answers.
You want to teach? Well, I think it would be a good idea to know some of the things you need to be. First of all, you need a very deep and continuing knowledge of your subject, because a teacher must always study. Teaching is a scholarly profession, and it should always be a scholarly profession. Secondly, you have to love young people, not resent their youth or their opportunities, because that will be felt by the people with whom you work. And if you don't love them and show that you do, you're going to have your difficulties. Thirdly, you need boundless energy, because teaching is such an prodigious user of human energy. And yet, at the end of the day, tired as you might be, you'll feel satisfied. Certainly, to point to these 4 young people who were just interviewed by Lynn Poole, it's really a privilege to have been associated with them and to feel that you've had some little part in developing them. Fourthly, you need to be critical of yourself, very critical. You'll notice these are all personal qualities that you either have or don't have, or you can develop. And lastly, I would say, and incidentally, none of these are mutually exclusive. You must have most of them or all of them if you're to have any kind of success in teaching. You have to have a high standard of achievement. Now, I think I would be letting down teachers all over the country if I did not point to some of the disadvantages of becoming a teacher. No one needs to be told that emphasis is being put on the pay. The fact that teachers aren't paid enough. No one questions that. Editorials and papers and so on. But more than the pay is the fact that the teacher feels he doesn't have status as a professional. And most teachers would stay in teaching, even with the low pay, if they had the status. Because, to repeat the words of Henry Adams, teachers affect eternity, and they have no way of knowing where their influence on students is going to stop.
Yes, and that's really one of the greatest statements that was ever made where a teacher is concerned. The influence, the rewards that come from being a teacher. I'm sure that there are many of you that would really give a lot if you could do this, to go back to a classroom such as this one with teachers, many of whom are in this country, teachers like Mr. Schwartz. The type of demonstration that we've had tonight would be wonderful. Now, it's a great profession, it's a wonderful profession. Many of you will want to join it and to go into it. We hope that the demonstration has given you some new idea of the dignity of a teacher. And we hope that next week you'll be with us when we discuss what has been called the incubator of American progress, our patent system. Several important kinds of careers are open in this interesting work to those with the right training. Among our guests next week will be Mr. Robert C. Watson, the Commissioner of Patents for the United States of America. So be with us again next week when we take up patent careers.
Your announcer has been Mac Edwards. Portions of this program have been mechanically reproduced. Tomorrow originates through the facilities of WAAM in Baltimore. Enjoy You Asked For It tomorrow night on ABC Television Network.